Have you ever wanted to be a superhero? Well, who doesn't? Although we can't promise you superpowers, we can help you feel like a superhuman with our friends at Ascent Nutrition. Ascent Nutrition is making a huge difference in this community, and they have a new product that we absolutely love: pine pollen. Last year, several prominent scientists started speaking out about the power of pine trees and the benefits they can offer us. Ascent Nutrition offers raw, wild-crafted pine pollen. Pine pollen contains 200 nutrients in it, making it a true superfood. It's nature's highest source of phytohormones, which support hormone and libido health for men and women. Pine pollen also supports brain health, detoxification, as well as many facets of cardiovascular health. Their pine pollen is selling fast. It's literally flying off the shelves. Ascent Nutrition is on a mission of offering deeply transformative and helpful nutrients to as many people as possible to help bring about a great collective shift in human consciousness and human health. To order your pine pollen supply and check out everything Ascent Nutrition has to offer, use the link in the description or visit goascentnutrition.com and use coupon code FKN to get 10% off your entire purchase. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Charles Utter. First, we have a couple of announcements. The Forbidden documentary will begin production this summer and will be hitting the road as soon as we can. We want to be able to visit with as many folks as possible, but we are going to need your help. If you'd like to help with a donation, you can go to supportfkn.com or use a PayPal link in the description. Anything is greatly appreciated, and if you make a donation through supportfkn.com, you get access to Cory Hughes' research going into his new book about the JFK assassination. Also, if you have a business and you would like to advertise with Forbidden Knowledge News, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. We have unbeatable ad packages. Come check us out. Forbidden Knowledge News always available on Rokfin, Odysee, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Rokfin is where you get our premium content, as well as all the premium and free content from every other creator on Rokfin. Go to rokfin.com/FKN+, or click the link in the description to sign up. And check out our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. You find amazing podcasts from our community there. Today I want to welcome Charles Utter. He is author of Roman Collar Crime, which is a chilling story about a small-town Catholic priest who was a con artist, fraudulent investor, and serial sex abuser, and Charles holds nothing back with the book. He is on a mission to influence a healthy redistribution of power that encourages more transparent and collaborative faith environment. Charles, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Another beautiful day in Colorado.
Yes, it is. It is a beautiful day in Colorado. And we were talking before, Charles, your story is incredible, and it's extremely important for as many to hear as possible, I believe, because these types of events are happening everywhere and on a much larger scale, affecting people all over the world. And yours is a great example of the corruption that's possible throughout all levels of religious leadership positions. But let's start today with a little bit more about yourself and your background before we get into the story.
Well, I actually grew up in the town that we're going to be talking about, where the priest ruled for 20 years. went to the high school that he ran, as well as all my siblings, and there were 7 of them. My family was integral to the operation of the parish because one of my uncles or a couple of my uncles were some of the prime supporters of the priest, and some of what they did, of course, was positive, but their incentive to keep the priest's abuse a secret really hurt people. But I, went from there on to college. I went to St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, graduated with a degree in history, and I went into coaching. One of the positives that about all of this was that the coaches that I had in high school were the best money could buy, and I learned well from them. And so I was a fairly successful coach for the brief time that I stayed in the business. But of course, they wouldn't pay me enough to raise a family, so I had to find an alternative. But yeah, I went into the life insurance business and then became a financial planner, and been very active in my church. Stayed faithful to the Catholic Church. Served on a parish council, a parish school board. Raised significant amounts of money for the school as the finance chairman of the PTO. And was instrumental in starting a community foundation in the community that we moved to in Colorado, which was Longmont, Colorado. So I'm the co-founder of that, and so been very active in the community and enjoyed life the best I could under the circumstances.
Now, what was it that actually brought you to begin writing the book?
Well, primarily it was the fact that we had a close family and had family reunions every other summer. So all 8 of us, and plus my mother usually, would gather somewhere in a nice place. 2-3 times I came to Colorado, and all that we ever talked about during those gatherings was this priest. I mean, it was constant, over and over at length. And so finally somebody said, you know what, somebody ought to write a book. Well, it was a while later that I decided, you know what, I think that's going to be me. And my sister, my oldest sister, only experienced his influence in high school, I think in her senior year. So she went off to college, came back home, married a farmer, a very successful farmer, and was active in the parish before she understood what was going on. And then she joined with one of the assistant pastors to create a group of people who went to the bishop to do everything they could to expose this priest and get him out of the community.
Very good. Well, let's start at the beginning of this story. Give us a synopsis of the book, and then we'll kind of break it down a little bit.
Well, I think that the people should understand that it's a historical novel. Mm-hmm. Okay. Most of the incidences that I relate in the book did happen. Some I made up. And of course, the details of the conversations and things that went on, of course, had to be, I have to use a little creative genius with that, because I didn't know what was said in detail. But in general, I start the book with a event at the state basketball tournament in where the school that he had run for a long time had won their first state championship game. And the sports writer that was there to cover the story had been covering the team for the local newspaper for a long time. And as a matter of fact, he was very complimentary to me when I was playing. Now, we didn't name this person, give him his real name or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But I then used him to at first say to the priest, you know what, you've done such a fantastic job at this place. this school. You've created these great athletic teams because not only did they win the state championship, but he hired great coaches and paid them extraordinary amounts of money, far more than they could earn any place else. My high school football coach was Ron Earhart, who later became the head football coach of the New England Patriots. Just tell you that just to give you an idea of the quality of coaches that he was able to hire in this little town, in this little school in southwestern North Dakota. And so the story that the sports writer was going to write was going to be very complimentary. And he was really excited about it, telling the world about this successful school and this priest that had built it and all those things. But as he began to talk to people in the community, he began to get some feedback that wasn't so complimentary. And in fact, you can read it in the book exactly how that happened, but he was advised, if he really wanted the facts, to talk to my sister. And so as he did that, then we kind of wrapped the story around his conversations with my sister, and each one of the incidences that I talked about in the book were really her relating a story to this sports writer. And then we tried to incorporate conversations with the bishop and to reveal exactly what his attitude was toward this priest and how he tried to hide the circumstances surrounding all of this to, quote, protect the church, et cetera, and tried to create some dialogue that would kind of expose the personality of this priest and the arrogance that with which he operated and justified his what I call depredations.
Now, you said you didn't use the name of the priest in the book. Are you even allowed to say a name at all for this?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why I can't. I called him Joe Brennan because Brennan is an Irish name, and his mother was Irish, and all of the people that he grew up around were Irish. His father was French, but he died when he was real young, and so he lived around his grandfather and grandmother and uncles and cousins from the Irish side, and so I called him Joe Brennan. But his name was actually Eugene Lemires, and it might be important for people to know his real name because at the end of the book we outlined what happened to the great fortune that he built. Because part of what makes this story so important is he wasn't only a sexual abuser, but he was a thief. But he was a magnificently successful investor, and he accumulated a huge amount of money. But when he died, it was discovered that the trust that he had created, which was designed to give everything back to charity, had created some some non-charitable income beneficiaries, presumably money going to some of the victims. He had a bad conscience apparently, but that invalidated the charitable trust and exposed everything to estate taxes. Being a single person and dying at a time when only $600,000 in assets could be passed tax-free to heirs, the estate tax would have been huge. So his trustees went to court to try to restore the validity of this trust, and it took 10 years for that litigation to proceed or to finish. And during that time, there was interest being charged. There was they were demanding money from the estate, and so they couldn't maintain the hotels that he had, which were 12, and you can learn that in the book. And so when it was all over, the value of the properties had dropped dramatically and weren't even worth enough to pay whatever estate tax was assessed. Now, the reason that knowing the actual real name of this person is that you can actually go to the internet, type in Eugene Lemires' estate, and you can see this whole story. I mean, this whole financial story, this tax story.
Now, what time period did this take place again?
He arrived in what I call New London. Everybody knows who this really that was associated with, knows who the real people were and who real names are and everything. So I don't think it matters if I talk about it. But it was New England, North Dakota. And what was the question? I just lost my train of thought.
What time period?
Oh, yeah. And it was from 1953 to 1973.
Okay.
So priests don't get to stay that long in communities anymore, but he was quite a presence.
Right. Now, he was highly influential in the community, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the community was about 50-50 Catholic and Lutheran, German Catholic and Norwegian Lutheran. And he convinced the Catholic component that they shouldn't mix with the non-Catholics, and he wouldn't let the kids in school date the non-Catholics, and he was constantly critical of those who were Catholic who were sending their kids to the public school and things. So he created this unity, but on the other hand, excuse me, I forgot to turn down my phone. But on the other hand, was able to grab the loyalty of the Catholics through their devotion to the church, basically, and their traditional belief that the priests were pretty much a sacred entity. And I think there's a lot of evidence in the book that I try to communicate that shows what influenced the attitude of the Catholics. But yeah, he had huge amounts of money that resulted from taking money out of the offertory, investing it on the one hand with, initially at least, with Joseph Kennedy. I didn't name him in the book, but I mentioned that it was a former president's father, but he actually invested in oil stock or pumping and dumping oil stocks in Alaska with Joseph Kennedy, which was a fraudulent entity, made a ton of money, got out and invested his money into G.D. Searle and Company, which was the founder of the birth control pill, and tripled his money in 2 years. And then followed Kennedy into the real estate business. And Kennedy was actually learning all of this stuff from some of the Catholic finance chairmen around the country, because he was the personal friends of Pope Pius XII. And so had close relationships around the country with various Catholic bishops and et cetera. And so, and this priest was getting this information secondhand from a friend of his who was the finance chairman of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, who he had gone to graduate school with. And so that's how this priest in this tiny little town was able to find all these great investments, because they were coming from a friend through Kennedy. Even Kennedy was getting information from him. It was kind of, this cabal of special interests, I guess you might call it.
Yeah.
But anyway,
go ahead.
He had all this money, and he was able to go out and use that money to hire these coaches, great coaches. And he did that because he knew that the people would fall in love with his great athletic teams. And the more he could win, the better off he was going to be. And so he paid inordinately huge amounts of money for coaches. And they did their job. They made it the sports capital of southwestern North Dakota. Basketball, state tournament teams and a championship and a few second place finishes, and undefeated football teams and state championships in wrestling and all of that. And so that's how he controlled the community, and that's how he stayed in the community for 20 years, even though the last 10 of those, there was a huge amount of rumors going around, and high school kids were actually following him around at night and observing his activities through his windows, and actually witnessing some of these events, some of these attacks on women. Not all of it got into the book because it wasn't revealed to me until after the book was published.
Well, let's talk about that. We know he was, a scumbag. He was stealing money, lying to the community, doing fraudulent activities. What else was this guy into?
Well, I mean, he was. I'm not sure what you mean by that. In other words,
Well, what other nefarious activities was taking place that would normally be looked down upon being in his position,
well, he was targeting women in the parish, and we don't know exactly how that transpired, but yeah, of course, you understand that the Catholic Church has something called confession, and in the 50s and 60s, the Catholics were pretty rigid about their going to confession weekly, at least, some every day. And they were telling stuff to their priest that they wouldn't tell to anybody else. And of course, they thought any kind of sexual activity, any kind of birth control was all a mortal sin. And so to be forgiven of that sin, they needed to confess it to the priest. And so presumably he knew what was going on in the community from that side of things from day one, and he would take advantage of these women. And they would come to him for counseling and end up being victimized. And so that was kind of the start of it. But I don't know, I'll tell the story about the one coach. This takes a little while, but it's probably emblematic of one of the worst things that happened in the community.
Sure.
So his first really great coach was a guy that coached me while I was in high school and took us to our first state tournament team, and was his cousin. And the guy had been a great athlete in high school. He had gone to college, been a great college athlete. He'd been a assistant coach at the college, a grad assistant. And so the priest recruited him with big money to come to this small town. He had offers from some of the biggest high schools in Montana to come in as an assistant coach. But this guy, the priest, gave him big money to come to this little town, and he was happy to do that. But the priest attacked his wife. The coach caught him having sex with his wife, and he took his gun out, and he was going up to the where the priest lived, and he was going to shoot him, but his wife got the cops there ahead of him, and they talked him out of it. But of course, that broke up that marriage, and that coach left town. And then the next one that came along was, he had a friend who was running the school, the Catholic school in Billings, Montana, and the coach there, the guy that coached basketball and football, had the winningest lifetime percentage in the history of the state of Montana in both basketball and football. And he wanted that guy. And the way that he got him was that the guy was an alcoholic. And he had ruined his relationship with his family, and they were heading for a divorce, and his alcoholism got worse and worse and worse. And so he left town, and nobody knew where he really was. And but the priest found him in a bar in Grable, Wyoming. And he went down there, and he wanted him to coach his teams. And so he had already talked to his wife, convinced her that he would be able to put this coach in alcoholic treatment. He would pay for everything. They would come to town. He would coach football and basketball, and their marriage would be restored, and all of those good things would happen. And that actually did happen. He came. He got straight, sobered up. Everything was going great. And then the priest had a big car accident. And the wife of this coach was a nurse, and she wasn't really happy with her job as a nurse in Billings, but it was a skill that she had, and she was good. The priest has this accident. He's in the hospital for almost a year and needed extraordinary care. And so, because this woman had been so appreciative of what he had done for her family, she offered to go to Little Falls, Minnesota, and work at this hospital and be his caregiver. So that happened. And it wasn't very long. He was sleeping with her.
Yeah.
And and you can read this in the book, how he manipulated women into sleeping with him. And one of his techniques, though, was that, while it might be a mortal sin, he was a priest and he could immediately forgive their sins, and so all would be well.
Hey, he's got a little logic behind the thinking, I guess.
Well, yeah, for sure. And the thing is, you have to understand that people in those days were extremely naive because they were not well educated. A lot of them hadn't even gone to high school, and their education came from the church. And the church used fear and guilt to keep them from straying. And it was just the way things were. So you really can't blame the women so much for anything other than being naive and letting this priest talk them into having sex with them. But, ultimately their families would find out, their husbands would find out. Many of those marriages broke up. But anyway, this family, this woman who took care of him, started sleeping with him. She had 7 kids with this coach. And ultimately the coach finds out what's going on. He starts drinking again. And things just fell apart. And it was his oldest son. That's another really interesting. His oldest son was one of the great basketball players ever played in North Dakota. At 14, in a small, tiny little 250 kid school, he was being recruited by UCLA to play basketball as a 14-year-old. That's how good he was. But he was, teenager. He was starting to find out what was going on. He was starting to talk. And so they sent him to California to one of the priest's hotels down there to work for the summer, to get him out of town so he wouldn't be spreading rumors. And of course, the father was becoming disenchanted, starting to drink again, causing problems in the community, getting in fights in bars, etc. Ultimately, I'll shorten the story a little bit. The situation got so acute that the priest and the mother decided they had to do something to prevent exposure. So they got somebody to agree to commit him to a mental institution, and they tried to grab him. They called him out of class, asked him to come home for a discussion with the priest about their situation, and their goal there was to force him into a vehicle that would take him to a mental institution.
Oh, wow.
And he was very suspicious. This is amazing that he never knew what was really going to happen, but he didn't go home. He got into his car. He drove off. With only the clothes on his back and the money in his billfold. And he wasn't seen again by anybody in the community, including his family, for 7 years. And he had just gone off to Wisconsin and applied for some coaching jobs there. And I don't know the details of all of that, but that's where he stayed for a while. And then I got to talk to him before I wrote the book. He had gone back to Montana to become a stockbroker, and he was living in Missoula, Montana at the time. So, but I mean, there's so much more to that story. It's all in the book, and it's just outrageous. But it ruined that family. 7 kids. Some took her side, some took his side, and split the family. And as far as I know, they still struggle with that.
Man, it sounds like organized crime. It seems like there's, no matter what type of position of power you're trying to get to, whether it holds, great power in a community, that it corrupts people, or it attracts corrupt people to those positions. The more and more I hear about religious leaders, priests, Catholic priests, taking advantage of their positions, stealing money, and it just makes you look at some of these organized religions a lot differently, and especially if their leaders hold the values that they do and are actually acting this way in our communities. How powerful do you think this guy was? To what levels do you think he was associated with?
Well, I think that the primary lever that he had was the knowledge that the bishop was a homosexual. And as a homosexual in 1960, as a bishop of the Catholic Church, that was not something that you wanted anybody to know about. And so he was able, as I wrote it in the book, he was caught with his boyfriend when the priest barged in on him one day. I don't know if that actually happened, but for some reason the priest was able to find this out and used it against the bishop. And the bishop was uninclined to do anything anyway, because protecting the church was their primary value. And so he never even, as far as we know, the bishop, that is, never even took this to a higher level to discuss it with anybody until he was forced to, after the people in the community began confronting him. But he would never discipline the priest for two reasons. One, he was afraid of being exposed, but the other reason was part of the problem. This priest had created one of the most outstanding schools in the state of North Dakota. These kids were well educated. They were the first, so many of them were the first in their families to go to college. The athletic program was just amazing. The coaches were outstanding. And he was able to keep the people under control because of all of this. And so there really wasn't a lot when it comes to how he was able to control things. It was more the fact that the church wanted nothing to do with this information. And so the bishop knew that. And so he just kept it to himself for a long, long time. Even though there were some of the crazy stuff, the girls would decide to become nuns, the ones that graduated from this school. And he would reward them with trips to his hotels in Disneyland in California. And he would have his way with them there. And these girls would go to the convent and they would tell their story to the mother superior at the convent. And she would tell them to not say anything, just offer it up for whatever. It was a good phrase that they always use, offer it up.
Yeah. How long was this guy in power for, or in this position for?
Which one, the bishop or the priest? No,
the priest.
It's 54 to 74, or 53 to 73.
Okay, so that's when he actually. What was the kind of cause of his exit from that position?
Well, as it was written in the book, was probably a little bit different, but the group of people that were in the community that were exposing all of this just kept insisting, gathering information. And there was an affidavit written by one of the prospective nuns that had the experience I just described, that was sent to my sister, actually. And they presented this to the bishop. And so he knew that things were going on, and one that in the middle of all of that, he was actually caught having sex with two of the nuns at the high school. And that was at the end. And it was like, oh, we've got this affidavit, we've got this evidence from the two nuns, and the nuns at the convent, at the mother house, were so up in arms that they said, hey, we're not going back to school. We're not going back to teach there. And in fact, the second semester, 1973, I believe it was, 7 of them just didn't show up. And he was forced to go out and hire lay teachers to finish the school year. So that's, the bishop was at that point where he couldn't not take action at that point. And so they finally defrocked him. But here's the rest of the story. He moved out of town, came to Denver, Everybody seems to love Colorado. Ran his hotel enterprise from Denver, and somehow got reinstated to the priesthood and was saying mass around the Denver Archdiocese before he died. Mm-hmm. You know, when it comes to the temptations that these priests have, despite the vows that they take, it's perfectly understandable that some of them, in fact, maybe even most of them, I don't know that to be a fact, but would fail to be able to live up to those vows. But I think the real problem is in the hierarchical nature of the Catholic Church. In fact, I'm not going to speak to other churches because the Catholics aren't the only one that have this problem. But it is difficult to deal with in the Catholic Church because of the hierarchy. What we have is an anachronistic system in the Catholic Church. There's a power structure on the top of which is a pope that is, what's the term I want to use here? I can't think of it off. But what he says on a doctrinal basis cannot be questioned. There's a word for that. I can't think of it right off the top of my head. But and so he's like the king, you know. And think about it. How many countries in the world that still have kings that are the sole power, that have absolute power, are governing countries that are prosperous and wonderful places to live? They don't exist anymore. But the church is that way, and the people around the Pope who actually choose the new Pope after the one dies, or in the rare case that he might resign, they're all seeking that position, conceivably at least. Okay, and so they want to protect that. It comes with a great amount of credibility, and it gives them great power and gives them great influence, and people love that. And so the system doesn't work anymore, and it never really did. You know, Martin Luther, Martin Luther, you know, had this conflict. There was a lot of reasons why Martin Luther went in the direction that he did, but splitting off from the church should have been an early sign that there was problems. But they just doubled down on everything that they were doing, and you know, you got to be a historian, a church historian, to really understand what was going on. But and I admit that I have a fair amount of historical background in this area. I can't take the time now to explain everything, but so that, you know, they, because of the power structure and all of the incentives to keep things secret that there are in this church, these stories don't get told, not because they don't think they're wrong, but because they're afraid that it's going to impact their power. Mm-hmm. And it will. They cannot enable these stories to become common, because if they do, people are going to walk. Yeah. And if people walk, the hierarchy loses its power. The problem with that philosophy is that this is the 21st century. People are finding it out. They're walking anyway. And that's the biggest problem that the church faces today, and it's other religions included.
That's what I was just about to ask you.
Away.
Is you know, are they losing their power anyway? Because it doesn't seem like, you know, our modern society is gravitating towards, you know, especially these Catholic and Abrahamic religions anymore.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's totally counterproductive. I mean, it just contributes, you know, and you know, they've tried to do some things that address the situation today, but it's not enough. And I'll give you an example. I had a parish priest, a really brilliant homilist, and I loved his Sunday sermons and things like that. And I went to him one day with my book, and I said, you know what? I think that we should use the information in this book to try to help people. And I said, would you please read the book and tell me what you think? And so he said he would do that. And then I set another appointment with him to discuss his opinion. And I went there that day for the meeting, and he stood me up. And then I was able to talk to him on the phone. He says, yeah, I read the book, but he stood me up. And then he would never communicate with me again. He didn't want anything to do with it, which just solidified my opinions about the problems that are created by this hierarchical nature of the church. He had to keep his bishop happy. His bishop has to keep his archbishop happy. The archbishop has to keep his cardinal happy, and the cardinals have to keep the pope happy. And so, and the pope is the defender of the faith, right? Mm-hmm. So he wants to make dang sure that negative information doesn't get out and alienate the people, instead of changing the hierarchical nature of the church and allowing the people in the pews, what I call them, the people in the pews, to have some power and some influence and the ability to confront a bad priest. And in fact, the ability to help him heal, because they're obviously hurting people. They're hurting others. They're hurting themselves too. You've heard of again, excuse me, I forget my terminology at times, but can't think of the term. I'm sorry. But when you're young, you develop psychological compensation for the way that you were nurtured. We're all inadequately nurtured. And so we develop compensations, and they become a part of who we are. We call it, in the faith that I practice, we call it a false self. And those are all very painful things that come back to haunt us probably about when we turn about 40. And it causes us to react in ways that, aren't very productive. And as a result, these priests can be helped, because these issues can be uncovered, and they can be discussed, and they can be we can help them ameliorate them. So we can not only help the people, if the people are in power, we can not only help those who are abused, but we can help the abuser as well. Because, the grassroots is where power, the real, the good sources of power emanate, and where others are granted power to exercise, administrative duties and things like that. And that can work in the church. Are you familiar with John Carroll, Bishop John Carroll?
Yes.
He was the first bishop of Maryland, came a pioneer bishop. And he actually brought this concept of democratic control modeled after the American Constitution. And he suggested that it be the way the American church is governed. And, they just dismissed him. And I don't know if they did anything other than that, but absolutely forbid anything like that to be instituted in the American church. And that's really the last time that there was any progress toward, diffusing power from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, and even though people may not be gravitating towards the church as much, it's still just as bad with people blindly putting their faith into leaders, into celebrities, into politicians, into a person just because they saw them on the television tell them to do something because they say it's for their health or they say it's for the benefit of someone else. Instead of doing their own work and research and looking into things themselves, they're just blindly following whoever's put on a pedestal in front of them. And I think that is one of the huge problems that got us to the state we're at right now.
Exactly true. I mean, it's just an insidious process.
Yeah, it
So,
certainly is. Now, what can we speak to possible answers for this? I know, like we said, there's less of this happening with church communities because church communities aren't as prevalent anymore. But with our local leaders in general, how do we prevent this type of corruption from running rampant through it?
well, I think it's got to come from internal transformation, internal reform. Um, you can't recreate the power structure. You can you really need to appeal to those of us who would like to be faithful Catholics, that they insist on change,
Hmm.
whether it's creating organizations that uh, help to identify problems and create solutions for problems. And then basically I think, starting at the grassroots, going to the pastors and saying, these are the things that we think can be done. This needs to change. And then, because there are pastors who know the problems and who would like to help solve the problems. And so you just have to find those that are amenable to the change and to the suggestions and will help with their own inputs and things like that. And then gradually move up the power structure to convert the bishops and the cardinals. And then at that point, you have to concede that, you have to make the Pope the equivalent of the Queen of England, an iconic presence, but no power whatsoever. That, I think that might be acceptable to people because, the Pope is thought to be the successor of St. Peter. Well, fine. I doubt if St. Peter had absolute power over his church. So why should the current Pope? It just then there's so many things in history that cause this to get set up the way it is that we don't have time to talk about. But
Mm-hmm.
but
Well,
again,
the Vatican is a center of power for the planet when it comes to the spiritual center, and then we have the financial center and the military center. But it's still considered one of the great powers on the planet, right?
that's exactly right. And the reform has to get. It's not going to be reformed in a violent fashion. That'll never work. In fact, that was the Romans tried that back in the first and second, third centuries. But the people can do something about it, but they have to be marshaled. They have to actually make a commitment to work with the pastors and then the bishops and then amongst themselves and the theologians and all of the people that would have positive input to create change. I actually think that this is inevitable because, a church of faith, of the Christian faith, can only allow the people to leave for so long before they have to confront the reasons. So we're not ready. We're not there yet. But I think, again, it's got to come from the grassroots. It's got to come from the people of faith. There's actually some organizations out there, that one of which I'm totally committed to, called the Centering Prayer Movement, that has captured millions of people across the planet in one of the most beautiful concepts of Christian faith that you can imagine. But it's quite contrary to what they find at Mass on Sunday morning. Let me put it that way. So, but that's your group that could potentially be the people, the grassroots element that starts this reform, and it's just got to happen. Because again, there's good priests; they're closest to the people. They see the problems. They see a lot of the solutions, but they don't have the power to even inquire about solutions. They're just under the thumb.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into like a too deep into a theological discussion, but I would think that a lot of these priests and bishops and people in high positions of power within the church are aiming to keep those positions of power no matter what. And there's this debate that the priest class was put into place just to be that, to be a priest class, a mediator between us and God. So we will always believe that we need them to communicate with what they consider God or spirit or the universe. We have to go through this priest class of person that can, and only through them or the church that we can get to God. And I think that's an illusion that, if broken, a lot of these people in great positions of power wouldn't have that power anymore.
Well, you're exactly right. I don't think there's any question about that. I think the great value, though, of the organized church is in introducing the faith to the children.
Mhm.
And the way that is done is extremely important. And the emphasis that the priest would use with a 7-year-old versus a 14-year-old versus a 20-year-old versus a 70-year-old would be far different. And there can be all kinds of space in there to allow the people to make their own choices, yet stay a part of the group. And that's what's being ignored. And whenever I talk about being a rebel, I think about the children. What are we going to do with the children? We're going to raise them in a godless society? Yeah, some people might say that's okay. I don't think so. I think that's, the ultimate cause of some of our societal problems. But we can argue about that. But anyway, so that's where I'm coming from. And again, what's developed at the top is insidious, counterproductive, alienating, and the secrets that they keep are hurting people, and that's got to change.
Yes, I agree 100%. I want to talk a little bit about what you had kind of alluded to, that there is this agenda to extinguish aspects of spirituality in the church, and people looking towards God, especially in the past few years that I've seen globally, and being even implemented by certain world powers, that you shouldn't get involved with anything spirituality. And there's been trickle down effects that are affecting people in the United States. And I want to get your thoughts on that. Do you see this kind of agenda to get people to a more materialistic state, more technological state, and less reliant on the natural spiritual state?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, if you go back to Lenin, one of the first things he did was attack the church. Why? Because that the church enabled people to think, to some extent, to think for themselves, and in ways contrary to what he needed to exercise his power. And so the less influence from the church, the better, as far as the secular state is concerned. And I think that we are seeing that in the United States today. I mean, I think there's really two sides that have been consolidating and opposing each other, because one side is trying to reduce the impact of religion and faith, and the other is trying to warn people of the hazards of that, and they're coming into conflict.
Yeah, and I think that is, that's a problem across the board, whether it's intentional or not. There's conflict and there's division, and we can't come together to even work towards a certain goal, because everything is being divided and pushed into just these separate camps right now.
That's all a top-down movement. Whether one side or the other, the people at the top are the ones that are creating the conflicts. And that's why I always talk about the grassroots, because real compromise and real good analysis comes from a wide variety of people at the bottom who come together and make the case that they then elevate higher and higher and higher until enough people get it to really change the world, change the country, whatever. Mm-hmm. But as a top-down situation, you got one side trying to stifle inquiry. You have the other side trying to demand conformity, and how do you reconcile that? I got to be honest with you. I'm afraid that the guns are going to come out. I really am, because I know people on the right very well, and they've all got guns, and they go to gun shows, and they talk, and they counsel together, and they're not happy.
Yeah,
and they're not about to start shooting at this point, but if they keep forcing them to compromise and lose their principles and whatever, it could happen, and that would be the biggest, hugest disaster that ever hit the world.
What about the possibility that systems we're seeing right now are eventually going to crash? The system is not sustainable. We're going to see an economic crash. We're going to see a lot of things kind of crumble because the old systems aren't sustainable, and I think we're going to be moving into a new age. But because of that, there's going to be a lot of growing pains. There's going to be a lot of destruction, a lot of death and rebirth. And with everything that comes after, do you think that there will be a kind of reconstruction of the Catholic Church or organized religion as well? I just don't see a sustainability in the current systems across the board.
Well, I'm extremely hopeful that we get to a point where the conflict becomes so critical that people rise up and say to themselves, "Hey, we need to change the people that are in control," and hope then that the new people will be more sensible and begin to tear down all of the negative side of things that have happened over the past 50 years and begin to rebuild in a positive way. I'm a real believer in the Constitution of the United States. I think John Carroll was on the right track when he tried to democratize the Catholic Church. I think the great power is in the hands of the people, and the people eventually wake up and start to do what's right. So I believe that's hopeful, and I think you might agree with me on that.
Yeah, I do. And this book is an example of how communities can come together and get the truth out. And I think it's very important for this around the board right now, for people that are holding on to any kind of truth to come out and get it out there. This is a time of awakening for people, and this is the time for us to make the changes that we want to see for sure. Charles, this is fantastic. Before you go, let the people know where they can find your book. And if you have any social media, website, all that good stuff.
Well, I'm guilty of not having promoted my book as much as I probably should have, but it's available on Amazon, and it's also available on Barnes & Noble's website. They haven't put it in the stores as far as I know yet, but in North Dakota, there's people coming into bookstores asking if they have it. So some bookstores are getting it through another source that doesn't matter the name of it, and putting it on the shelves. But mostly and most easily, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on what's the Kindle.
Kindle, there you go.
yeah. It's available on Kindle or in paperback on the website. My Facebook page is called Roman Collar Crime. You can go there. I'm not posting as much as I used to, but that's about it, I think, right off the top of my head. But go to Amazon.com, put in Roman Collar Crime. It'll come right up. You'll see the book. You'll see a picture of me. It's $12.95, I think, to purchase. So pretty reasonable.
Definitely. And it's fantastic. I highly recommend everybody go and pick one up. Charles, this was great. I'd definitely love to talk to you again in the future.
Well, I'd be happy to. Anytime that you want to talk, I'm available.
All right, great. Everyone, have an excellent evening, and we will see you again tomorrow. Talk then.
Okay.